Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back, and hopefully you all had a really nice lunch. I am going to try not to speak too much because we keep on running out of time. So our first speaker after lunch is an ACITA member and a regular presenter from Brussels. He's going to provide us with a view on what the new government can expect from Brussels, and cover some recent EU case law, I understand, and provide us with some insight on the EU's deforestation regulation, which seems to be pretty much of a buzzword at the moment. So, Yves, it is all over to you. Thank you. I don't know which ones you want, sir.
Thanks, Des. Hello, everyone. Glad to be back with you. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Yves Molin, international trade and customs lawyer in Brussels, helping clients in investigations, litigation most of the time, and those that have been investigated and litigated against, I do provide some compliance work. So that's what my team and I do. So I'm going to speak about 3 topics today. One of them is deforestation, amply covered already this morning, so I'll be very short on that. Maybe I will digress on CBAM and other topics for a couple of minutes. A review of some of the, actually 3 cases of the Court of Justice, which are in very different sectors, but are an interesting illustrations of what the EU's case law is, and that's an area where that might be of relevance for practice in the UK as well, because there isn't a lot of case law in the UK on customs. And then I will give you my 10 cents of what I think your new government means for the EU-UK relationship. Yeah. Okay, first case. Are you aware that in 2018 the EU and the US got into a fight? The US imposing, when actually the UK was still a departing member of the EU, we imposed national security duty, Section 232, against the EU, and for the very first time, the EU retaliated in kind, almost in kind, in a very short period of time. To give you everything I say, you must take with a pinch of salt, because in January of that year, I was asked, what do you think the EU will do, reacting to the US Section 232 duty? I said, no, the EU will do what the EU does. It will go to the WTO, and I will still be there in 7 years' time. 7 weeks later, there were measures being floated and duties imposed. When those duties were imposed, the idea was to retaliate against those WTO incompatible measures that the US imposed against aluminum and steel from the EU. So what the EU did is to impose rebalancing duties, so to reestablish the balance upset by the illegal measures of the US. That's why they're called rebalancing duties against aluminum products, steel products, but also playing cards, bourbon whiskey, products made in districts where the Republican lawmakers pushing for the Section 232 duties had electors. It was also one of the districts was also making Harley Davidsons. So Harley Davidsons at the time said, I don't care about those duties. I'm going to, wrong accent, obviously, that's not how they speak. I'm going to make, to supply the European market for my factory in Thailand. And they were well advised, so they had someone who told them how to acquire Thai origins for their bikes. So they had that. But they were quite vocal about it, press releases, notes to investors. And so what the Commission said, okay, is any of you aware of the anti-abuse provision concerning origin in the Customs Code, Article 33 of the Delegated Act, introduced very discreetly through a Delegated Act in 2016, the legality of which was questionable and actually currently being questioned before the Court of Justice. So whenever you do something, as a reaction to the imposition of trade remedies or rebalancing duties For instance, anytime you do something, like opening a new plant or redirecting production from one of your existing plants to the EU as a result of the trade defense measures, in the broad exception, the rule of origin can be disregarded. So you no longer look at the last substantial transformation, which is what, if you're playing in that game, that's what you're always looking to ascertain. Where is the place where the last substantial transformation took place? It was Thailand, but the rule says when you do ship from Thailand, in order not to pay the duties, I'm not going to look at the last substantial transformation, I'm going to look at where the parts are coming from. So that's Article 33 of the Delegated Act. And the parts that were coming from the US, and so the motorbikes, they were originating in the US. It's an interesting case. Belgium actually had issued a binding origin information confirming the origin, so they were protected for past imports. But there is a mechanism where the Commission can tell a member state, I don't like what you say there, I think it's wrong, I order you to withdraw it, which Belgium did. And that was what Harley-Davidson's challenged. They lost, so they challenged the validity of Article 33 of the Delegated Act and this ignoring of the last substantial transformation. They lost before the General Court, and they went in appeal. And what we have now is an opinion of the Advocate General. Can I read them? My eyes are not getting better. The case is C297/23 in the slides, not those that you're going to receive. And in effect, while not declaring Article 33 as being incompatible with the UCC, that's when the Commission adopts a delegated act, it cannot depart from what the legislator has decided. The Advocate General said, no, it's not incompatible, but it must be interpreted in such a way that what Harley-Davidson did there is what any operator is expected to do, is to react to a measure, and that is not triggering the application of this residual rule. What I've not explained is that the peg of that anti-abuse rule, to acquire origin, last substantial transformation, resulting in a product having properties I did not have before, manufactured in a facility equipped for that purpose, and that is economically justified. And that has been there for 60 plus years, actually 80 years, no, 60 years, 1960, without ever having been the subject of any interpretation or litigation anywhere we could find. But the Commission in the Delegated Act attributed meaning to those words, economically justified. They said, anytime you do something in order not to pay the duties, the substantial transformation isn't economically justified. And so that's the Advocate General recommends to the Court of Justice to consider that what Harley-Davidson did there is economically justified, which is to address the new measures. Let me quote, by relocating production to another country, Harley-Davidson has done exactly what the additional custom duties were intended to achieve. Okay, so in 80 or 90% of the cases, the Court of Justice follows the opinion of the Advocate General, so we'll have to see. It's an important reminder that first, don't communicate in the press when you want to do something like that, but customs authorities, when they think that you've done something wrong, they will come up with something. That in my experience, you should not consider past performance for guarantee for performance in the future. The thing that used to be illegal, everybody's been doing it. Customs told me it's fine. If it's considered to be excessive or abusive, customs come up with something new. And so here, Article 33 was something that came up in the Delegated Act. We see today abuse of rights, the concept of abuse of right being used to reject classification when the authority considers that you should have paid anti-dumping duties on e-bikes, countervailing duties on e-bikes, for instance. So that is an important reminder. Be very careful about what you do when the idea is not to pay anti-dumping or similar duties. Second case, and there, don't know what language that is. It has a lot of funny consonants. Prismian Cabluri Sisteme, probably Romania, case C16823. When you advise clients about classification, the first thing that you do probably is to check whether they are binding tariff information out there. So you interrogate the EBTI database of the Commission, you check for the tarification, you say, yeah, so the right classification, look, this company, that company, Greece says so, Germany says so, etc. Well, it's important to remember that a binding tariff information is only binding on the company that has requested it and to which it is issued. And so here the question is, can the economic operator rely on BTIs issued by the very same authority to another company? Don't remember if it's the same group or not, it doesn't matter. It has to be the same legal entity. And the Court of Justice says no, customs authorities make mistakes. And if they make a mistake in the BTI that's given to somebody else than you cannot rely on that BTI. So that is an interesting reminder of the importance of using binding information appropriately. Often in connection with big volumes, typically, if you have a question on a volume product. Oh yes, that's brilliant. So that's the name. And so the company had argued that the principle of legitimate expectation somehow would have overcome the fact that the BTI was not issued to it. But the Court of Justice says no. That one is, I think, one of the most interesting cases of the Court of Justice of this year, C67 of 23, SZ, who's the name of an individual. It's an interesting reminder of a number of things. The facts are, there are, as you may know, sanctions against Myanmar. There are sanctions against lots of countries, but Myanmar have been there a bit longer, so there are cases now coming up from the Court of Justice. In Myanmar, one of the product sanctions, you cannot import into the EU a series of wood products, logs, timber, and timber products originating from Myanmar or exported from Myanmar. Two things, export or originating. It turns out that an individual and his company were responsible for a significant amount of importation of Myanmar logs, not directly from Myanmar, but they were debarked and debranched. I had to look it up. And they were then cut into wooden cuboids. That's the second operation. And then the third operation for some of them was to cut into planks. And the gentleman there was condemned to, at first instance, to I think 19 months in jail, or a year, 9 months in jail, several millions euro, I think not in duties, it's not about the duties at all, but in a fine equivalent to the profit derived from the importation. And so the case went in appeal, and there was a reference from the federal court in Germany asking the question essentially about the origin, right? I mean, what is a log originating in Myanmar? With these three scenarios, debarking, debranching, pretty basic, making a square or a cuboid from the trunk and then cutting into planks. So there's an analysis of origin. And then there's an additional question on what does it mean to export from? On the origin, the court looks at its case law, like Zentrag and like the case in the 90s or late 80s on if you cut meat into steaks, lots of value added, but essentially you have meat, and so it is not a new product. The same with powders. Doesn't matter how intensive or costly it is to filter powders. Forgot the name of that case. Not a new product. And the question is how to apply this to this product. Well, you have a log, and then you have a debarked and debranched log, still a log. So it remains Myanmar. Same for cutting the log into shape, still a Myanmar log. But now, if you are talking about the planks, it's different because they have a number of processes, and they also, it's not in this slide, but note that it's change of tariff heading at 4 digits, so indication that it's quite a different product. And so importation of planks from Taiwan is not importation of Myanmar, of planks, of wood products originating in Myanmar. So interesting there that you get origin wrong, you go to jail. You get it right, you don't go to jail. It doesn't happen very often, but in the context of sanctions, it is happening, and it will happen more and more. Then on the question of what is exporting from, the court considers that it covers only goods that have been imported into the EU directly from Myanmar. That is an interesting parallel. I don't know if you are following the litigation or the duties imposed on solar panels that have been, I mean, those cases have been, litigation cases have been ongoing for years, but the latest flavor that is now being litigated is whether the anti-dumping and anti-subsidy duties on solar panels that were extended to Taiwan and Malaysia, when for products consigned from those countries but don't have to originate there, whether that is legal. So that question is also being referred to the Court of Justice. The question here is not exported from, but consigned from. And so that is something that we picked up could be of use in those cases. On the risks, that enables me to, or gives me the opportunity to warn you about complying with sanctions. One of the big issue that importers faced a year ago when the EU sanctions required to guarantee that there isn't Russian steel in this long series of products, that does require to actually do some pretty thorough supply chain due diligence that nobody was, and I think is still able to do. The following things happened. The Commission explained initially, why don't you provide me with a mill test certificate? What is that? So people check mill test certificate. I don't have one, can't get one. Provide me with something else, equivalent, a statement from your supplier. And then you companies provided that, and then the goods were released. So there was a 2-week period in Belgium when everything was blocked at ports and airports. Steel products, probably more ports than airports, maybe except for fasteners. In a roundtable we had with customs at the beginning of the year, a discussion between a customs official and a declarant said, look, I'm being asked to ask you for those documents. You tell me that they don't contain Russian steel and you provide me what you can get. I have no ability to show that what you're saying is wrong. So I have to release. I cannot let all those things stack up at the ports. And so I release things. Now, you'd better not be the one guy that is importing all the Russian steel because you will be caught up at some point, right? Now it's a formality, which is somehow warning to you. But if you end up being the one representative or the one company that is trading in Russian steel and you didn't know because you didn't ask the questions, you'll be in trouble. And we haven't really seen a lot of enforcement of the EU sanctions yet. And you may also know that enforcement of sanctions in Europe is in the EU is at member state level. So there's a lot of differences between member states. It doesn't mean that it won't happen. And this case is a useful reminder that you don't want to be the part of the small number of companies that know what they're doing when they are breaching sanctions. Which is also an interesting, I won't say much of that because I think all of it was said this morning. But
what happened? Did he get out now?
It's no, of course not. I mean, what the Court of Justice does, it rules, and it says you breach the sanctions if you import debarked and de-branched logs, or if you import cubic logs. And the guy did a lot of that. So I don't know actually what the German court did decide in the end. But obviously that person, and he had already been, I think, spent some time in jail, and that actually I'm the least qualified person. You're probably better qualified than I am to advise on German law. But with that, equipped with those findings of the Court of Justice, the German judge is now going to be able to confirm that the individual did breach the sanctions. Not good news. EUDR. So let me take a different angle just to complete or what was said this morning. I'm being asked, what does it mean? I mean, what is the risk I take when I import, if I import EUDR products without doing all these things? And I mean, to me, the sanctions example sticks with me, right? It won't happen that all of those products, paper, cocoa, whatever, what have you, are going to be stopped at the border everywhere in Europe because you don't have the required documentation. You need to complete your declaration correctly because then that's going to trigger some flags at the moment of importation. You will need to be asking the right type of question like your peers in the profession are doing. So be as good as the best 25%. I don't know how you assess that. So you need to do something, right? But do you need to do everything that is in the regulation if it's impossible to do? No, because you're going to be like everybody else, and not everybody else is going to be fined. Two types of clients that have very different approaches. If you are in the business of importing commodities, containers of this or that, maybe some of your containers will be in trouble sometimes, and so take that as a learning experience and the cost of doing business and just improve, provided you have done the minimum compliance steps. And if you are in the peloton, right, you don't need to be the 2 or 3 people at the front. You don't want to be at the back. You want to be in the first part of the cyclist there, if I can use a cyclist bicycle analogy. What won't happen is that everybody won't be fined and not all goods will be stopped at the border. So you need to just breathe in, breathe out, and stay in touch with your authority, stay in touch with the Commission, explain to the Commission your concerns, what works, what doesn't work. And in my experience, it's difficult to get the Commission's attention because they are solicited by a lot of people. But there are places where the Commission can be reached, like the Trade Contact Group is one of them. And if you do have a good point, the Commission most of the time listens. There was an example given this morning by the HMRC where the Commission says no and then the Commission says yes, because somehow you came with a good point, they heard it repeated by others and then they changed their approach. We've seen that with the CBAM as well. We've been helping foreign producers in the CBAM for more than 2 years. Their main first and constant issue was, I am not sharing all this data with any of my customers. This is confidential things, my business secrets, so I'm not giving the spreadsheet with all the data to my customers. And we told the Commission at the beginning, and we told them, come the 1st of August of 2024, I have to report actual data. I'm sorry, but I will not. I will not share that actual data with them. I want to share it with you. And so what the Commission did, it's not the request of some of our clients and many others in the same situation, I assume. They first, maybe you've noticed that the spreadsheet that is made available to traders says optional, mandatory, in a way that's different from the regulation. Yet there's more optional in the Excel spreadsheet. They told us recently, yeah, we did that because in this way you don't have to share the information. And so in a sense, it is a soft breach, white breach, can you say that? Soft breach of the regulation for practical convenience. What they have said they would do, they already initially told us it would be January of this year, but now it's January of next year. They are going to allow foreign producers to submit their emission data directly in the data hub, right? And they will allow importers to use the data in their own declaration. So that's very pragmatic and actually steps in the right direction. So my take on this is don't give up on the Commission, because none of those regulations are going to go. Forced labor is coming, deforestation is there, postponed by a year. So the press has it that it's probably going to be voted upon by the Parliament on the 13th or 14th of November. That the Parliament, it's not sure that the Parliament will accept to just extend without further changes, because the Parliament is upset, and so they might ask for things that they didn't manage to get during the legislative process the last time round. That's to be watched. And what's going to happen with the EUDR, it's different from the CBAM. The CBAM, it was rushed, but there is the transitional phase for the deforestation. it was rushed and it wasn't a transitional phase. So what they are doing now is they are giving a transitional phase for all those questions to come up, for them to be able to tell traders, UK is fine, and maybe Congo isn't, right? Which is we don't know yet. So it's an important time now to engage with the European Commission, to have concerns brought to the surface and repeated. Because this point that we've been making on confidentiality of data, it took 7 meetings with the Commission for them to understand. The second or third meeting, we had a director who told us, "What are you talking about? We have the GDPR. So we protect data in this in the EU." You're right. Have you listened to anything that we've said? And so that person never came back in the future meetings, and we had more constructive discussions with them. So 12 months is nice to have, but it's not a lot of time. And so just don't drop your tools now. Just make sure that you continue whatever you were doing to comply, because this is not going away. The other schemes are there, and they all require essentially, and I don't know if it's where you said that it would have been nice to have some common approach, like systematic approach, absolutely, because all of those schemes, they require exactly the same thing. You need to ask a question to your suppliers, and each company has exactly the same suppliers 100% of the time. So rather than asking different questions, and there's the tax department and there's the ESG department, like people from all over the place asking things in silos, could put things into the same place and ask a single set of questions to your suppliers. That's the good place to start. And now for this, what is the new Labour government? What does it mean for the EU-UK relationship? My take on it, having, I've read, right? I haven't spoken to Olaf Scholz or to your new Prime Minister, so I'm just reading what they say. I think it will do what the UK wants. The UK wants to reopen things and to make it easier to export goods to the EU. That requires some tweaking, I don't know, I don't know what exactly is the idea of your government. That's not going to happen. So there will be no change in the sector that occupies us, which is trade in goods. There will be the TCA. What there will be is goodwill. And goodwill is very important to make a free trade agreement work. So there's a series of committees, and if you have on the opposite side of the table someone that you like and respect, it's very different than if you have a government that has David Cameron in it, if I can say. Couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe it. So it will be different. I think the mood will be different in those committees that already exist to iron out issues and find solutions under the existing agreement, the TCA. But they won't be, until the TCA works and functions, there probably won't be anything else for trade in goods. For the thing on what's going to happen is defense, obviously. Everyone wants the UK to be involved in our investments in defense. Although France doesn't want the UK companies to be able to benefit from any public money that's given out to the military sector. But there will be agreements on defense. The EU would like the European students to have access to UK schools, including for the many Europeans who are here. Apparently it's more difficult than it used to be, and that's already been a no by the UK government. So to me, it looks like there is not a lot of difference in the concessions that the new government wants to make. There's a difference in attitude and compatibility of character, which is probably going to make a difference in how the existing texts are enforced. And with that, I have 7 minutes for questions, if you have any.
Here we go, one right at the back.
Thank you, Yves. In terms of EUDR and in the forest products sector, they have I think it's a Nordic Swan certification process. Do you know if that will still be valid in terms of due diligence and origin of timber? And
I don't know, but take note of that. I think what we are waiting from the Commission now is a lot of, unless someone has read the guidance from cover to cover, and it's in there, we are waiting for a lot of the implementing acts from the Commission and guidance that's going to come. So typically, this type of questions should reach the Commission, right? And when it does reach the Commission and they understand the impact of it, it finds its way in Q&As. You see that in sanctions. You see that in CBAM. So just don't give up on the EU. It's not a perfect organization, but which administration is? I mean, sometimes I have to laugh when I come here with pleasure and among friends, but it looks like the UK is able to provide complex rules without the help of the EU. And so the EU is just an organization, and it has to regulate the entirety of the 27 member states on the rules on which it is competent. That creates difficulty to access the decision makers, but it's possible to get access to them. The way to do it is through trade associations and participation, involvement, and in Brussels. But it's totally doable.
Any other questions?
Yves, do you have much optimism on the UK and EU coming to some kind of agreement, either on SPS, veterinary agreement, or on aligning carbon emission schemes, emission trading schemes to make UK and EU CBAM a lot easier for traders? Do you see that as either or? Is there political will to potentially do one of those things if not?
So for alignment on the CBAM, which I know better than batteries, it's possible, right? Third countries do come to Brussels and talk about the CBAM, essentially now to explain how their ETS systems work and to help their domestic producers to comply with the CBAM. There is no country better equipped than the UK than to be recognized equivalency. But that does require the UK to align the price of its ETS allowance cost to the EU's, and that I think is something that the UK is not ready to do. But if the UK were willing to do that, the problem with the EU is that it won't be able, under the CBAM, it won't be willing to give to the UK something that it won't give to others. And it has refused some flexibility to the US when you may, I don't know if you follow this, but until a year ago, September of last year, there were negotiations on those rebalancing duties I mentioned that the EU imposed. They were suspended, so they are still being suspended. The US also suspended its Section 232, so these national security duties against the EU, pending resolution. And the resolution took the form of a negotiation on targeting carbon emissions and overcapacity, which means China. And there was a lot of pressure from within the EU on the Commission to find an agreement, and the Commission wouldn't budge from for the US. So what they didn't do for the US, they are unlikely to do for the UK, but it's always worth talking with the Commission. And I'm not optimistic in the immediate future, to be frank.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you very much. Sincere apologies on the sort of mixing up of your presentation, and I promise you the correct presentation will be included in the pack. A very special thanks to Yves. He tells me I was on the train at 4 o'clock this morning.
Thank you.
So thank you. Arnie, before I want to see that your slides are here. Do those look like yours? Yeah, okay. I'm told that our next speaker doesn't need an introduction. I mean, people have been referring to his presentation since before I got here this morning. So, Arnie, the floor is absolutely yours.
All right. Okay, cool. All right. Hello, everyone, and thanks for having me again. So, funny thing happened. One fatal morning, Kevin called me and said, "Hey, can you do a presentation for ACITA again? This time, talk about UK CBAM." I was like, "What?" And I thought, okay, and you will get, what is it now, 25 minutes? Okay, 25 minutes. I said, okay, that is going to be a quick presentation because here is my UK CBAM update. Thank you. That was quick. What else do you want to talk about? So look, I don't know if you know something that I don't, but I've not heard anything on UK CBAM for the last 6 months. We're still in a consultation phase. I've not seen a legal text, so what do you want me to update you? Yeah, you all know glass is included. And apart from that, it pretty much replicates the EU one, we think. Given that we do not have legal text, given that we do not have anything that could take the form of law, why should I tell you something that is going to change, especially in the wake of a spring update? I don't think the UK as key priority is the UK CBAM right now. However, we should take this time to do a reflection on maybe this. Maybe we should take a look at where we are with CBAM, and you've heard speakers today speak about CBAM quite a lot. So it's clearly on the mind of not only EU importers, indirect representatives, but it should also be on our minds. So given that we do not have legislative text, we are actually at the stage where we can talk to the governments and tell them, hey, before you go into this, you might want to learn some lessons. So my job, I thought, is to flip it around a little bit and draw from the EU CBAM implementations from what we know so far on what we could not do in the UK. See how that works. Now, does everybody know about CBAM? Like, is everybody like fully clued in on it? You calculating carbon emissions like crazy? Yes? Okay, cool. Well, look, if you're not, then that's what we could talk about. And I will go through this very quickly because I appreciate that you've done this. We could do a refresher. We could talk about quickly what these guys have been talking about when they were mentioning CBAM, because some of you might have not, know the intrinsic details of it. Then I'll talk about something, a quote that one of my clients said, the most intrusive EU legislation I've ever seen. Now, that's a bold statement, but let's have a think about what that means and whether it's right for the EU Commission or EU to be so intrusive. Then I want to talk about what happens on Halloween. You all excited about Halloween? Ooh, yeah. So for the EU, we have a little problem here because this is the deadline for the Q3 reporting. And as you've heard, the word from default, standard, turns to actual. And moving from default to actual is a big problem. And that means we're going to have something that I've not seen before, but maybe in other legislation we have. We're going to have an EU-accepted mass non-compliance on the 1st of November. So is that a possibility? And why? How did we get there? And then I want to reflect a little bit on what that means for us, customs professionals, customs managers. We do tariff classification, origin valuation. We don't calculate CO2 emissions. So what does that lead? And you've heard it earlier, actually, from Kolja, when he talked about the changing role of customs professionals or global trade professionals and this new compliance. And then finally, I'll draw some conclusions for lessons. So let's go. So obviously, I'm not going to talk about all the details of how you calculate CO2 emissions, although that is very fascinating as well. I'm learning a lot. But if you do want to know how this all works, then you can always knock yourself out on the website of the European Commission, where everything's there in such a painstaking detail that it will put you to sleep, even if it's not a Friday night. So then, the first thing, I don't need to tell you what CBAM's goals are. They are honorable, they are wonderful, they are definitely what everybody would agree with, I suppose. We need to get those greenhouse gas emissions down, and we have the Green Deal, and we talked a lot about it. We also know that we're addressing carbon leakage, so we know that if we make others pay in the European Union for CO2 emissions, so the concept of the polluter pays, that some companies might then shift production elsewhere where such a requirement is not there. So for all of these official reasons, we now have the CBAM as the solution to prevent carbon leakage while allowing us to meet our ambitious, see what I did there? I'm British, but I'm also German, so I'm just flipping constantly back into the hour and there and whatnot. If it's positive, it's hour. If it's negative, it's there. So anyway, Yeah, so we're gonna meet our climate targets, and CBAM is the way, is the magical formula. And you all know what product groups are involved here. The big ones obviously being iron, steel, energy by itself. If imported is a CBAM product, aluminium or aluminum, like the Americans say, very interesting, is also in scope. And you know about cement and fertilizers and hydrogen and all that. That's not really the group itself are not the problem. You also know that there is a transitional period. That transitional period is important because it is the learning phase that we're in. And it was said before, but it means you need to have this very clear. In this learning phase, we all learn. The Commission learns, the national competent authorities learn, we as traders learn. And if we get it wrong, it's not so bad. Yes, we will still be formally non-compliant in less than 2 weeks. And then from 2026, and you heard it from Michael earlier, there is the requirement to be an authorized CBAM declarant. And that means unless you know what you're doing, unless you're filing these CBAM reports, imports are officially prohibited. That's important to know because while you're preparing for EUDR and you've got another 12 months, don't forget that there's CBAM also, plus all the other things that we're doing in the UK. So if you're trading with the EU and you're doing, God forbid, both, maybe wood and iron, you have a lot to do. So it is important that you understand we're in a transitional period and the rules change, in parts simplify, in parts become more stringent when the definite period happens. The challenge becomes when you look deeper into the products that are in scope, and I've highlighted some here that my clients are particularly affected by. And of course, this one is the killer. That one covers you all. I'm exaggerating, of course, but if, how easy is it to do 7326 and boom, you're caught by all of it. That is a massive amount of product. Okay, we don't need to go through the rest. The only difference I want to point you out to here, it's 4 digit. It's not good news. At least here it's 8 digits. Then we got some 6 digits in there as well. I don't need to go through this. The purpose of me putting this on there is so when you get the slides, you can actually reuse them for your daily work. So that's why I put this all up there. We don't need to go through all of these. The one thing I want to show you though is aluminum. That one is very, very challenging because of course it has 7616 there as well. And as you may know, it doesn't only deal with CO2 emissions, it has a second GHG attached to it, which I can't possibly pronounce, perfluous something something. But what that means is 2 greenhouse gas emissions mean more trouble for us because the whole system with the second greenhouse gas for aluminum it requires you more calculation and more headaches. This is important because it was already pointed to it as well. We have either the importer or the indirect representative, and they have obligations. What are the obligations? Mandatory reporting. At least in the transitional period, it will be only mandatory reporting, but that's already quite heavy. Because you're supposed to report the GHG emissions. Now, if you're an importer, that's already difficult because, the importer doesn't produce the GHG emissions, is it? It's some factory somewhere around the world that has produced the product that was then sold to someone else in, say, China, who sold it to someone in Turkey, who then sold it to you, and now you're supposed to find out what emissions happened at factory level? No. That's not going to happen. Even worse if you're indirect rep. I am sorry, an indirect representative files my customs declaration, and that's what we do. Is that not right? We don't deal with CBAM. This is my client speaking, I cannot ask my clients who pay me to ask their suppliers, for their suppliers to ask their sub-suppliers for the GHG emissions. I am just the customs filing guy. I don't do all these things. Yet out of the sudden, as you heard, you might be legally responsible or else. Now, this does not sit well with most indirect representatives, with most freight agents, nor should it sit well with their client. It's a quarterly report, so you've got to repeat this 4 times a year, which will change. And the information that is required is very, very tedious. It is impossible for a customs person, a customs professional, to have any clue about unless you learn it. Just like we started when we did tariff classification, valuation, origin, and AEO and whatnot, and it was all new to us, and we're like, whoa, what's this? The same again. First for CBAM, then for EUDR. Good luck. So we need to include this. We need to have this data. And once we have this data, we need to file it. And if we don't file it, if we say, do you know what? I am not going to participate in your funny exercise because it's Halloween and I go out with my kids and we trick and treat and whatnot, then there are penalties that can be imposed on you. So you're in the position where you are a European indirect representative and you have no opportunity to, as you've heard Yves also say, to get any of this data, yet you will get the penalties. And obviously that means that the operator of the installation also has some obligations. So while I, as a EU importer or indirect representative, may file the data and might deal with the Commission repository and all this reporting, given that I do not have emission data, it falls on the factory producer, if you excuse the simplest word, or the CBAM goods producer, the installation operator, to monitor the emission, and you've seen this in parentheses, calculate the emissions. And then you must, of course, give these back to me as indirect rep, and then I ask my client, the one who pays me, to confirm the accuracy of the data, because I filed, because I get penalties. Do you think my client is in any obligation to tell me anything? They will, of course. They will try to comply, but also they cannot send me an email to say, I confirm that this data is in line with Annex 1 or Annex 4 or Annex 3 of the CBAM regulation and implementing regulation. But if I don't have that, how can I fulfill the demands of the, where is he, Q&A, requiring me to provide sufficient evidence that I tried? So what do I need to report then, if you imagine what CBAM requires me to do? And just bear in mind, while I'm talking, all of this can happen to us if we're not careful. Yes, so just replace EU by UK and imagine what that would mean for you. So now imagine what I need to report. So there's good news, because these things I have. Because I say I'm the indirect rep or I'm the EU importer, these things I can give you anytime, no problem. It's on my customs deck. You have provided it to me through invoices, packing lists, and whatnot. This I don't have. This I also must provide. I can go through each of them in painful detail. You don't want me to. Unless you want, but then we have to talk offline. This is so intrusive, just as Yves said. I in the EU need to know your Chinese factory number and where it is located. And how has this Chinese factory produced this, set the system boundaries for the production route, if you follow, obviously. And then only once you've set the system boundaries and you have determined your production route of that Chinese factory and the American factory and the Argentinian factory, of course, all of which I need the data, you then can start to monitor or calculate. I can't do that in Europe because I don't have the data. I may know how to calculate it, but A, I don't want to because I report and you calculate. So UK people, start calculating. I will sit here until you give me perfectly calculated data. Please, now. You have 10 days. Less. Don't know why I'm looking at you, but... Direct represent direct data, direct emission, indirect emission, precursor, and carbon price. 4 things, easy to remember, yes? Direct, indirect, precursor, carbon price. Easy? Thank you. Move on. Okay, so... Comments. You don't have this data. Only the person that is producing this can have it if they measure. If their government does not force them to measure, they won't. In fact, there might be a policy that says do not measure because we're not following this crazy Western style laws. So what then? What are you going to do then? They say, no, my government forbids me. So then what? So it means what? It means now we are at a situation where I must ask you for data that probably in this room none of you can have. But you have 8 days to get it for the last quarter. Can you do that? If the answer is no, that means now you know that we will be knowingly non-compliant. All of us will be knowingly non-compliant. The EU Commission knows it, we know it, everybody knows it. Who in customs loves a situation where you are knowingly and willingly non-compliant, when literally everything we do in our life is to be compliant? This does not work. Of course, if you want to have more details, over 100 pages, we'll sort you out. You can please do that. You can read this. Default values were the solution, but default values are no longer available to the majority of our products. Default values were easy because you could just take the emissions times the number of kilograms, tons imported, and that would be it. That is perfect. That's why the industry, trade says, let's make these default values permanent, so we can always use them. Then it's finished. This times the number, done. What's the problem? If you do that, you kill CBAM. Why? Because what is the objective of CBAM? To reduce emissions. This means I'll just pollute, I'll just use the values.
And Arne, it wouldn't be WTO compatible because then it would be the same price for everybody.
Okay? So you can't. So even if we pushed and pushed and pushed, it wouldn't work. Default values are dead. Which leaves us with what values? Say it proud and loud. Actual values. Okay, I can't make this in 25 minutes, but I'll try really quickly, because I was told 40, but hey, okay. Listen, you don't have to worry though, there's good, if you want to really know how to calculate it, how to measure, you don't have to buy expensive measurement equipment, because there is a calculation formula, okay? It's called the EU method. There is equivalent methods, but because it's the EU method, we have to be very careful how we say that here in the UK. Because of course we will be against right away. We will never adopt the EU measure, the EU method. So be careful with that. But here is the message. If you are dealing with CBAM and you have this problem I'm describing right now, the one thing indirect representatives will tell you is to calculate your emissions following the EU method. Please, if you can, don't be smart. Just do it. Just do what they say. Because otherwise we'll all be in a big mess. If you do not, this is what's going to happen. The NCA, ooh, the National Competent Authority, yes, love that. They are going to be in touch and they're going to possibly give you penalties. Not sure this is going to happen in the implementation period, but they could. These are the dates, as you might appreciate. As I've said, 31st of October is the next deadline. So that means for the July-September import, you need to provide me this data now, because I need a bit of time to put it into the system, yes? So please, tomorrow, noon, is your deadline, okay? I told you it's easy, just calculate. Again, you might be confused and you may think, Arnie, this is way too fast. Can you just slow down a little? I'm not that fast. I know, I feel the same. But again, please read, okay? The only thing I will say, this document, this is how it's called, should not be for you. You can read if you want, but this is the document for the people outside it is for you, outside the European Union. So it is for, this is not the document for the EU importer or the EU indirect representative. This is the document for you guys, the people that actually have to calculate. So let's split it that way. We in the European Union, we file, you measure. Sweet? Good. If you need more, 100 plus pages. Couldn't have said it better. And then, Yves said it. There is the template. Have you all heard of the template? Have you all opened the template? Do you love the template? I love the template. You know it is actually a simplification? Seriously. Because if you know what to put in and how to put it, and it does the magic. And here is why. And this is very good for the members of Michael. Because at the end of this mega monster spreadsheet, there is a summary page, a summary sheet. And this is where, when you fill it in correctly, all the data is correctly calculated with all the emission factors and biomass coefficients and whatnot. Because I told you, measuring, the word measure is wrong. It is calculated. You put in various points of input materials and out comes your emissions. For an indirect rep, that is gold. Because then I can take it, given that the Commission says this is the gold, and if you use this template, we assume it's correctly calculated. So we can use at the end bit, we're going to have the summary numbers, and these we're going to file for you. So the recommendation is to use this template, as hard as it may be. There are people that can explain you how to use it, including those that know how to calculate emissions. What we then do with this is we're going to put this into a report. This is what the report is going to say, most of which you can already see is not so complicated. There's the ORI number, there's a country of origin. This is all normal custom stuff. Where it gets tricky is here. Name of the installation. Again, the Chinese or the Indian company of your supplier's sub-supplier, plus the installation address, plus direct, indirect, all of this other stuff. This is what we need to report. And if we don't have it, we can't file it. And if we can't file it, we will be delayed and we might face penalties. We need to give this, the total quantity, the total embedded emissions, the actual emissions, the indirect emissions, and the carbon price. The same 4 things I mentioned that you need to put into this spreadsheet, I need to report. It makes sense. I report it here. Unless you have cool, sophisticated software like Anna's software, you need to put it there. Okay, so this is the transitional CBAM portal. And the reason this matters is because this intrusiveness that Eve talked about, where he said, I'm not giving you the data, you can also see it here. Because it says installation, operators. So all of the details that you will never get because it's confidential information, you need to put there. So the future solution of the EU Commission is a good one, but it will require your suppliers and your sub-suppliers to all register with the European Union. Nice. And then they, the Chinese, the Indians, the Argentinians, the Canadians, will report yearly their emission into this system, and you, thanks to EORI numbers and unique identifiers, can then grab only the emissions and file it, which you will file once a year in the definite period. So in other words, what started really complicated, like anything else, can work out if you engage with it. So I am running out of time in my 25 minutes. I just want to let... I do have a bit more time? Oh, you shouldn't have said that. Well then, once upon a time. No. So I wanted to point you to this sentence here, because this is really what strikes me. Isn't the EU the one that says, oh, we're not going to do extraterritorial dual use like the US? We're not going to do US re-export controls. Isn't the EU that says, oh, we'll have this blocking mechanism against the intrusive nature of foreign countries' laws? But what else is CBAM? What else is EUDR than to burden other countries and to burden other operators with this kind of information? I think the EU is now in the realm of extraterritorial application of their own laws, something the EU always wanted to avoid. And you can argue this with me, of course, and you can say, nah, it's not the same. But secondary obligations? Meaning, if I get penalized as the EU importer or the EU indirect representative, I'm going to pass this on to whom? I'm going to change my contract with whom? I'm going to change my relationship with you. So in a way, if it hurts me, it will hurt our business and your supply chain. So this means the EU, even after Brexit, is still telling you what to do. So given that nothing has changed despite your attempts, what now? What can we do? Okay, so one of the ideas is, well, shouldn't we have a communication strategy where we tell suppliers, maybe it's a bit late for that, but hey, maybe the EU should think, or EU companies can think about these kind of things, right? So maybe there's a role for ACITA even. For example, can ACITA create ready-made materials that our members can use on how EU companies can communicate with the outside world in a way that is compliant? So we have lawyers in the room, they can write something sensible about CBAM, and we can just use it, rather than trying to all ourselves try to communicate in some ineffective way with the world. There are lots of ideas here of how you can maybe communicate or explain what CBAM is all about in a way that gets to the same outcome. Give us the spreadsheet. Don't be scared of the spreadsheet. Give it all to us. So it's very intrusive, and we need to tell, it's like telling your child not to do something or delivering a bad news. How do we deliver the bad CBAM news to our clients without spooking them off? And then this. I have told you that on the 31st of October, the EU faces mass non-compliance as the Q3 deadline looms. It is widely acknowledged that the data that we need legally to report will not be available. Not for, and Eve had a very interesting view. Oh, you will not get penalized because if one person does it, if all of us don't do it, then they can't penalize us all. But think about this. Is that really the way we should be operating? I'm not sure. We should strive for compliance wherever we can. And this really makes me nervous. And it makes a lot of EU importers and EU indirect representatives nervous. Because the EU Commission now knowingly and willingly accepts mass non-compliance by the vast majority of EU importers of CBAM goods, which all collectively would be subject to investigation and penalties. It is true that the EU Commission states that in compliance with Article 16 of the CBAM implementing regulation, national competent authorities are responsible for enforcing the obligations, and, as the Belgians have said, they enjoy a margin of appreciation. What is that? A margin of appreciation. That's literally from the text. Notably regarding assessing whether a reporting declarant has taken the necessary steps to comply with the obligation to submit a complete CBAM report. Ladies and gentlemen, we have here a situation where on a website, the Belgian authorities, these ones, have told us that we have a margin, you're all non-compliant in 10 days, but we might, with a bit of discretion, not penalize you. There is no law that protects us. There is no firm assurance. There is a statement on the website and maybe a Q&A. Since when is a Q&A anything to go by? But it's the only thing we have. And that is enough? So here, this is what you then need to do. You will still be mass non-compliant, but now to ease the burden, this is the word. In the context, the Belgian NCA will consider, not agree, justify difficulties. Okay, how do you justify difficulties? Okay, fine. In getting the necessary data on actual emissions value from the producer of the CBAM goods, particularly, reporting declarants must undertake all possible efforts to obtain actual emission data from their suppliers or producers of CBAM goods. Okay, so tell me, what is this, please? What are all efforts? All possible efforts. So this, what are these? Tell me, what are all possible efforts? Exactly. Okay, so first of all, what is this? Who defines this? And then it says, where declarants eventually fail, like we could manage. Okay, to get actual emissions, they should prove. Okay, how do you prove? What is enough proof? That they have undertaken all reasonable efforts. What is this? You want me to fly to China and try to measure myself? Is this all reasonable effort? To provide justifications, like what? Emails, phone calls, presentations, and include supporting documents. Okay, so please log everything. Every day, one email from now, and log it. plus all the documents you have, the presentations you've made to them, the supporting evidence, the letters you've written. When do you stop? Where do you start? And all based on information on a website. You're telling this to customs compliance officers. Are you serious right now? And you should show unsuccessful attempt and steps taken to obtain the data from some. So what does this mean? What this means is I need to bother my suppliers beyond belief. Okay, so I have established what this means for my clients. They are not happy. Normally I try to make them happy, but now they have a list of actions they have to do. And it's all started with a call with the clients to say, please tell your suppliers that we are going to bother them, but we don't mean it. We don't want to be bad, but we have to be because we have to have a dossier by the 31st. So now they are in agreement that they get every day an email to ask them for the emissions, so that I have at least documents, I have presentations, documents, guidelines, phone calls, more presentations, and emails pestering them. Because nobody will tell me what that means. I asked the Commission at the last joint contact group, they said no, please ask the Belgians. Ask the Irish, ask the Germans. No, I don't ask the Germans. Okay, management of CBAM in companies. So for you, what does this mean? Please answer these questions now. Go. Who should report CBAM information in your company? So think about a UK company. Now, an EU importer who you had a relationship with for 10 years comes to you and says, please give me data. You're not set up for this. You have a customs department, you have a sustainability department, if you are lucky, or not, because nobody ever asked you to monitor anything. And besides, you're only importing from somewhere else in the world. You don't have the time, nor the energy, nor the power, nor the manpower to monitor anything. Please go away. Okay? So now I'm asking you this. Every day I'm giving you an email. What are you going to do? Ignore me? I know, don't answer. But who should request the CBAM information? Should it be me as the indirect representative? Should it be you as the supplier? Who should report the emission? Do you want the EU importer to do? Who within the EU importer company is supposed to do it? Is the customs manager responsible for CO2 CBAM reporting? If not, who? So who's responsible for CBAM compliance then? Is it the customs guy? It cannot be the CO2 guy, because the CO2 guy doesn't know customs, and CBAM is enforced at the border, correct? You also need to make a customs declaration and flag CBAM goods. So certainly it is the customs guy. But do you know how to calculate emissions? It can't be the customs guy, can it? It has to be the sustainability person. Who's going to speak to the NCA? The customs person? Who is going to talk to HMRC, to Belgium Customs? The sustainability person? How do you ensure CBAM compliance in the company? Don't you need new procedures, no policy, no SOPs, new KPIs? And in total then, where does the customs professional, where do you fit in CBAM, but also EUDR? Don't you need to have that discussion? Otherwise, it will be dumped on you, and you can't perform because you don't have a degree in sustainability CO2 calculation, like you do in customs. And given that CBAM compliance heavily draws on customs, there's EORI, there's CN codes, there's origin, there's free circulation, there's IP. You can't dump it on the sustainability person either, can you? So what you need to think about is to rethink where compliance goes now in CBAM. And this brings me to what Kolja said at the beginning. He just said it in passing, but it is a fundamental concept to understand. The role of the customs manager of today is no longer the role that we understood it to be when we started this. Due diligence is much more important now, and what it means changes depending on the legislation you're in, whether it's be EUDR and a due diligence statement, or whether it is CO2 emissions and CBAM reporting through CBAM, and the list can go on and on and on, as you've heard. So and then you heard an interesting word from Yves. He said the word silo, and when I hear silo, I wake up. Because silos don't fit anymore in this world. This is the world where a customs person and an environmental person sit together, an ESG person sit together and form a working group or a sub-department or whatnot and do compliance the new way, together. And this means that the customs manager from today, who was a geek, I'm sorry, dealing with origin, valuation, classification, and whatnot, now needs soft skills to be able to constantly talk about this thing from a customs perspective without upsetting your peers. To get anywhere, we need to work in sync. And this is a new world we're in and a new definition of what a customs manager of today is. I won't go into this because I want to go to one more point, and that is the lessons for UK CBAM, and then I finish. And you can read everything I put on these slides at home when you get back. So what does this mean for the UK? I appreciate you wanted information on the UK CBAM and you got zero. Okay. So it means what? What worked was this gradual implementation part, the part where we had years to prepare for it. And I think that was a good idea. This implementation, giving yourself time and seeing how it works, is a good idea. The carbon reporting requirements, they've now been set kind of by the EU with the EU method. I know we don't like the EU that much sometimes, but we should not start to change that. We should keep this reporting method because otherwise we're going to duplicate efforts. We're going to calculate for one and then we're going to calculate for the other. So let's keep it as close to whatever the EU is doing than possible. In the end, we'll get to some CO2 emissions. Of course, sectoral coverage should be considered in the concept or in the context of the UK, and you know that some are out and glass, for example, is in. But why glass? Who made these studies? I want to see what else is on there. Support. What about support? What about financial support? Given that we get so much red tape and there's so much to pay for the preparation of this thing, the one thing we've never discussed is money. Isn't there supposed to be a fund which helps us transition to comply? Isn't there a transition fund? So doesn't that apply for CBAM as well? We also need robust digital infrastructure like the EU in a way has, if that's what you like. But if we are concerned that we're not going to get the funding for the trade single window, what hope is there for CBAM? But without an infrastructure that's digital, how on earth are we going to manage? So unless the UK is serious about giving us the tools to comply, this is going to be a mess. And the biggest one, the one that I have my biggest beef with as regards CBAM, is consultation with the private sector. In the TCG, the Trade Contact Group I've been having the pleasure of being a member of for the last 2 decades, we heard CBAM after the law was written, after the law was implemented. It doesn't excuse us from looking into it before. But a consultation with CBAM and the impact did not happen until it was too late. For us, it is not too late, but we can't let the same mistakes regarding representation happen to us as well. See what I did there? Us. So I'm thinking a CBAM JCCC should be called upon, not only of customs specialists, but also environmental specialists, so that we can work this out together, jointly, without silos, and not have CBAM on the agenda of a trade contact group meeting. One thing I'll never forgive the Commission is that they didn't invite us to be part of the one stakeholder group that there is on CBAM, citing that they wanted to talk to industry installation operators. And now they have the mess. It occupies an hour or so of our trade contact group every time, and it is met with fierce resistance. We should not have this, and make sure that whenever we go down the route of UK CBAM, we are listened to. We must insist upon. And ACITA has a big role to play, so chapeau for putting it on the agenda. Don't let it drop. SMEs need a flexibility. At least like an EUDR, this should also be provided for. We need to press this as well. And there are a few no's. I don't know how we're going to do this, but this idea that we're going to be intrusive and we're going to tell others how to do it, I know that's kind of the raison d'etre of the whole thing, but in general, it should be no to intrusiveness. It should also be no to non-compliance. We cannot be in a situation where we not even blindly, with eyes wide open, we walk into a situation where we are on non-compliance. That is not acceptable. And of course, red tape and administrative burden. If you haven't got it yet, this thing is a bureaucracy monster. It is a red tape thing that just surpasses everything you've seen. The entire operation deals now with CBAM because they're all scared of the 30th. Most of my clients are just that deal with CBAM that are completely worried and focused on that right now. So we need to deal with red tape, and we need to think about the administrative burden. So while CO2 emissions fighting is super important, and it is the way forward, don't get me wrong, I will not negate the fact that we need to improve sustainability and environmental sustainability, and we need to get the CO2 emissions done. But and I think it was Jeffrey in this room who said it, let's do it with common sense. And that means involving all of us and not them designing a system for us. So, conclusion, and I'm so out of time, I don't even know how you allow me to speak on. But let's finish this. The goals and objectives of CBAM are noteworthy. The implementation period is welcome and needed. Forcing companies into legal non-compliance at the mercy of the legislator is unacceptable. Intruding into our partners' business operations is equally unacceptable. Keeping red tape and administrative burden in check must be a priority. And the UK is well advised to take note of the CBAM implementation mess and learn valuable lessons. Is that enough? One last thing, there is support. If you want 4 hours of this with me, there are 3 trainings happening separate. So it's 6 to 12 hours of training if you want. 1 on fundamentals, 1 on comms, 1 on how to file. There's an instant download training. And finally, there's a free webinar on the 7th, 1 hour, distilled, all the CBAM stuff, and you're free to sign up. And very last thing, and then I promise, there is a professional custom skill training course, free, on the 13th of November, just off here, so 5-minute walk from here, that you're very welcome to attend. And it talks about the soft skills rather than any of the hard skills. So if you want to join that, you're very welcome. And if you are interested in a bit of spooky fun, then next week we're launching a Halloween customs import game.
And we will leave those slides. So when you get the pack, you'll be able to contact Arnie. He has sort of spoken so much, there is no time for questions, but Collier is insisting. 2 questions, okay?
Not even really a question. First, a comment, Arne. I found your appreciation of the EU's position not to be extraterritorial quite empathic, because we always have been. What is export control? What is an end-use declaration else than extraterritorial? It's just that we get more frank on things now with ESG, and of course it's extraterritorial. One of the most important things I found in your presentation, the proposal that there should be, and also addressing ACITA with this, there should be, industry or association level solutions offered, because what we see in Germany is the real opposite, because all of the things we presented this morning is in force or about in coming to force. And I can tell you the practical example as a managing partner of a SME. So we have 50 people, but we have all the large clients. So when you have only large clients, you aren't afraid anymore. But what happens is every day we get letters on our desks saying we have to declare something on Russia, on CBAM, on deforestation, regardless, by the way, of the products or services we are trading in. It's just every day we are asked to sign stuff which is unsignable. And I suppose is only signed by people who are afraid or don't understand. Audit rights every time. Huh? So, and this is a situation where my personal feeling is, and it's pure bureaucracy between companies who replicate rules and regulations they don't properly understand because of the change in culture. Huh? And where I personally would blame the German associations for is not having proactively created templates for CS3D or the other stuff, so that at least there is a common core understanding between operators, private companies, which then may be extended in certain cases. But what happens, everybody builds its own questionnaire in silos. It's all siloed questionnaires with stupid questions. And by the way, when you then try to speak with people about this, it's impossible, because the one who sent you the stuff don't even understand what they ask you. That's a common, it's I don't know if it's as worse in the UK, but it's a total nightmare. So what I do, I put it on a pile, and of course I sometimes read it for amusement, but I don't sign stuff, which it's questions like. Could you please confirm that you abide by all export control regulations in the world? No, it's a standard from a large German industry corporation. I would say it's impossible, even technically. And this is what already has happened. And even in the UK, there still is a chance to avoid this. Do your best. It's a total nightmare.
We're going to give it another shot.
All right.
One
this-
question.
Okay, I'll try to be quick. First of all, thank you so much for the shout out to the CBAM Boo software. But I'm very interested in your views on enforcement, because we know, working back from Commission numbers, that even on default numbers with default values, compliance is 20-25% at best. So this is not going very well. We know that the Commission has no intention of applying penalties during the transition period. Those of us who were there for the trade contact group really appreciated your question about what does it mean to show necessary efforts, and the answer left us more confused than before. Like, email a day sounds about right. And then finally, even if your supplier provides you with the data, there's actually no mechanism to check whether the data is correct. So my question is, what lessons could the UK draw from that in terms of designing something that's in any way enforceable?
Well, I think we need to have a bit of a think when this subject is brought up by government again. There's supposed to be a consultation. I don't know what the outcome of that was. When this comes back into our tray table, we need to remember what we've talked about here, right? And then we need to insist that this is properly consulted with, and that we say you need to draw the lessons from what you've heard. And as regards enforcement, yes, I also don't think that we're going to all go to jail now, or we're going to be penalized. So, of course, this is unlikely. The point I'm simply making is the lack of legal recourse, I suppose. The fact that the only thing that I can give you versus the legislator is the FAQ of the Commission and the website of the Belgian authorities, where it doesn't even say we will not apply, but we will look at what you do and then decide on a case-by-case basis, which might be right, might be wrong. But I don't know how any lawyer or anyone can be comfortable with that. I am certainly not. But it seems to be the only thing left. And Yves said, give the Commission a chance. Well, if FAQ is the only thing that we're going to have, I'm not so sure. The point is, we are in an implementation period, and we might get away with it, but not endlessly. And so the call is, you've heard it, I've told you, you need those CO2 values. You can still say no to me now, but I tell you, by the end of next year, you need to have read this guidance, and you need to get your act together while you're doing EUDR, CSDDD, and whatever else we're dreaming of.
Thank you, Arnie. And in the final slot today, we've got Simon Pettigrew, who's going to update us on Northern Ireland. Thank you.
Perfect. Afternoon, everyone. Excuse me, sorry. Firstly, thank you for the invite. I think it's the first time I've spoke here. There's a few familiar faces, so some of this might not be new to some, but very much appreciated the invite, and also very thankful for the flexibility and letting me deal with personal matters this morning before coming along. What I thought would be good to do is kind of talk to you a little bit around the implementation of the Windsor framework that's already happened within the UK, and also a little bit of the upcoming changes that will be coming in. firstly, before we sort of start, you probably will have seen, but the government confirmed that the Windsor framework and new arrangements for parcels and freight that were initially due to come in at the end of September did not, and that was kind of owing to a number of, oh, that's very bright light, a number of impacts that caused through the pre-election periods, our ability to publish guidance, engage with business wholly to allow them to get ready for those changes, and obviously the period following the general election where we had to brief new ministers and make sure they were up to speed with what was happening. And based on that, we have agreed that the implementation of those arrangements won't come in now, and businesses should be fully prepared by the 31st of March 2025 for those new arrangements. We've also confirmed that the Trader Support Service will be available to support businesses through that transition period, so throughout 2025, and there will be a full procurement exercise for the service from 2026. And we are planning some more guidance updates on gov.uk. I think there should be one on Thursday. Don't quite hold me to that just yet, but there should be some guidance coming out soon, and then that will start the ball rolling to help with that sort of intense engagement that we will be looking for up until the end of March. So just looking at what we've brought in so far, firstly we introduced the UK Internal Market Scheme. So UKIMS was launched in 2023, replacing the previous UK Trader Scheme. That is open now, businesses are able to apply for that, and that will continue to be open. And that allows businesses to declare their goods not at risk of entering the EU single market where they are for sale or final use by an end consumer in Northern Ireland and in Great Britain, in the case of Great Britain to Northern Ireland movements. One of the things that the Windsor Framework introduced was an increased capacity for businesses to apply for UKIMS. We changed the establishment criteria, so under the UK Trader Scheme, businesses had to be established in Northern Ireland solely to be able to apply. That is now UK-wide, so any business established in the United Kingdom can apply for that. And there was also a change to the rules regarding goods that are subject to commercial processing, allowing more goods to enter not at risk, including where the annual turnover was more than 2 million or some other approved purposes, which are on the screen there. I won't sort of go through them all. But as I said, goods moving under UKIMS are not subject to any duty when the goods enter Northern Ireland. And as I say, when goods are not able to move under UKIMS, they would have to complete a sort of standard customs declaration and perhaps pay the rate of EU duty on those goods. One of the other schemes that we've introduced is the duty reimbursement scheme. So we have introduced a scheme that allows businesses to reclaim duty on tariffs that were paid on goods that were originally treated at risk, where they have evidence that they did not enter the EU market. So this has been available, or is available, for goods moved since 2021, and that can be backdated. So business can make claims for those goods up until 2026. So any goods come in before 30th of June 2023 can be made for up to 2026. And then after June 2023, you have 3 years to submit a claim for those goods. There is obviously some requirements to make sure that the duty can be reclaimed, but as I said, businesses can submit that evidence to HMRC. As it's a new scheme, we haven't been prescriptive in the type of evidence requirements that businesses need. So we're very open to working with businesses to ensure that we can find a reasonable solution to make sure any goods that haven't entered the EU, the applicable tariff is reimbursed. There's no limit to how many claims can be made, and it can also be made for goods that are subject to EU trade remedies. So any goods that were at risk because of an EU anti-dumping measure that was applied, they are also eligible to be reclaimed through the reimbursement scheme, including that anti-dumping duty. We have also introduced the Customs Duty Waiver Scheme. This operates independently to the duty reimbursement scheme and has been in place since January 2021. And that allows businesses to waive any duty on at-risk goods using their de minimis state aid allowance. From January 2024, the majority of businesses can now claim a waiver up to €300,000 or equivalent of £275,000, I think, over a 3-year rolling tax period. And to do this, businesses need to be subscribed with the new online service to do so. as I said, that can be used either through the Trader Support Service or through any other intermediary by using the NI code on the declaration when the goods move. Now, looking forward a little bit, there are a number of facilitations that are being brought in under the Windsor framework that will allow to simplify some of the processes for goods that are moving within the UK internal market. And these will be available, as I say, when the Windsor framework is fully implemented, and we're working with businesses to ensure they're ready by the 31st of March next year for these. The main facilitations that we have is the internal market movement information, which in customs speak would be the H8 declaration, but this is the sort of terminology we're using to sort of decustomify the language for sort of traders using it. It's a simplified data set that will be available to any UKIMS authorised business, and that reduces a number of the data elements required compared to sort of full customs declaration. We also have a UKIMS EIDR process, and we'll talk a little bit more detail about that, as well as a trader's good profile, which is a bespoke system that HMRC is developing for UKIMS authorised businesses. So a little bit more on the internal market movement information. As I said, this allows businesses moving goods under UKIMS to reduce the requirements when submitting that information to HMRC. It can be submitted either prior to the goods movement, and if it's done so, there is no requirement to submit any supplementary declaration, so that is a sort of once and done approach. But it can also be submitted post-movement through the EIDR process, so that allows businesses some flexibility depending on the nature of the goods moving. Some of the requirements for that, as I said, traders have to be authorised for UKIMS. It's only available for goods moving from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, so goods coming in from the rest of the world direct into Northern Ireland will still require a full customs declaration. And the goods have to be in free circulation, so goods moving through customs special procedures, etc., are not eligible for this. Some of the main benefits from this, it reduces the data elements by around half, so I think there's about 70 data elements on a standard customs declaration, and there's about 30 now. A lot of this will also be pre-populated through the Trader Support Service and through the Trader's Good profile, so that allows it to reduce quite dramatically. And the main sort of facilitation this offers is the reduction of the commodity code requirement. So standard goods will be able to declare at a 6-digit commodity code level, so no longer have to be declared at 10 digits, allowing them to be grouped up into a sort of easier method. And for controlled goods, so your standard SPS goods and excise goods, have to be declared at an 8-digit commodity code level. One of the other facilitations we have is good SPS goods that are moving under the Northern Ireland Retail Movement Scheme are essentially declassified from a Category 2 good from a customs perspective, so they are treated as a standard good and can also be declared at a 6-digit commodity code level. The Trader's Good profile, as I said, is a new system that HMRC is developing, and a slightly novel system that we're putting in place. And the basis of this is that it will store information on the goods that a trader regularly moves. So it will store information such as authorisation numbers, commodity codes, country of origin, and it will link that to a standard goods description. So that goods description could be anything from a plain English goods description of what the good is. It could be a SKU code or an inventory number, anything that links to that business's own records. And when the goods move, they would only have to provide the TSS or their customs agent that goods description, and all of that information can be pulled from the goods profile, and that allows it then to be pre-populated into the IMI, or the internal market movement information. Sorry, I should have said firstly, the H8 or the IMI is currently available in CDS trade address rehearsal and trade tests, so businesses can start playing around with that and testing that with their own systems. The declaration completion instructions for that are available on our developers hub, so that is published, and we'll publish that on gov.uk shortly. The Trader's Good profile is currently in private beta, so we are testing that with a small number of select businesses and planning to put that into public beta well in advance of the 31st of March so everyone can get access to it. Just going back to some of the requirements there, so it is wholly optional. There's no requirement for any business to use the goods profile. It's a facilitation we're building to try and help reduce some of the admin burdens, but If businesses have their own processes or customs agents or intermediaries have their own systems similar, they can definitely use those. There will be a maintenance requirement of this, so if a trader changes the goods that they're moving based on like seasonality or something like that, there will need to be a maintenance process for that, but it will hold all the information available there. And they can give access to that to their agent, intermediary or the TSS to allow that to be pre-populated or accessed on their behalf. As I said, the main benefit of that is it prevents the need to provide commodity code and some of the complex customs information on a per movement basis and links it to that goods description. And the tool itself will have direct access to the online tariff tool, the digital assistant and web chat to help make the classification of those goods and categorisation of those goods a bit simpler. The final thing I want to touch on was just around the movement of parcels from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. So currently in terms of parcels, there is no requirements in place based on the agreement with the EU not to introduce the requirements that were under the previous Northern Ireland Protocol. So under the previous Northern Ireland Protocol, any parcel, regardless of whether it would be sent from a consumer or a business to a consumer or a business in Northern Ireland, would have required a full customs declaration. Obviously that itself proved very difficult to implement, and as such that hasn't been the case from now. The Windsor Framework brings in some new arrangements in relation to parcels, so I'll talk through a little bit of these. One of the important things here is we've introduced the UK carrier scheme. That is a scheme that allows businesses involved in the movement of consumer parcels to register with HMRC and allows them to move those parcels without any requirement for any customs declarations, any duty, any notification to customs on entry into Northern Ireland, no interactions with CDS at all. So any goods moving under that scheme to or from a consumer in Northern Ireland will no longer have any customs requirements on those goods moving. Instead, the authorised business under the carrier scheme would obtain some information from the sender, which would be what's in the parcel, where it's going, and provide that to HMRC through a bespoke service that we've developed. Just kind of going through the specifics there. So as I say, any goods moving from a consumer to a consumer, as I said, no requirements there. The carrier would just submit some information to HMRC on a regular basis. Any movements moving from a business to a consumer or a consumer to a business will move under the UK carrier scheme. As I said, that carrier would then provide some information regarding when the parcels on entry into Northern Ireland. The slight nuance for these is when the data is submitted to HMRC. If it is a business to consumer, it's submitted prior to the arrival of the parcel in Northern Ireland. And when it's consumer to business, it is submitted before the parcel is delivered in Northern Ireland. So a slight nuance just in terms of when the data is submitted. The main difference there is when it's a business parcel, they'll move through the same routes as freight. So goods can be moved under the UK Internal Market Scheme and benefit from the facilitations that we talked on there. But they will require some form of customs information submitted to CDS, either a simplified data set or a full customs declaration. And goods that are destined for the EU or otherwise at risk would have to use the red lane and would therefore be subject to a standard international customs declaration and may have EU duty applicable on those goods. I think that was my last slide. Sort of went through that quite quickly, so very happy to pause.
Have any questions for Simon? Well, we're about to. Oh, there we go.
Hi, thank you very much. You said that there is a procurement service happening in 2026 about TSS. Do you have a bit more details about that?
So I know we are currently going through some engagement with industry to understand what industry would like the new service to look like, and we'll be coming up with more detail about the actual procurement of that service shortly. So we've not went into the actual procurement of that yet, but we'll be coming up with more detail about how to do that shortly.
And that's going to be open, we're going to be all informed about that, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Anyone else have any questions? That looks perfect. I mean, oh, we have.
Sorry.
Hi, Simon. Parcels. Back when this all started and we were looking at parcels, there were lots of... Sorry, there weren't definition of parcel. There wasn't a standard definition of a parcel. And I know that some people were talking about the ability to ship cars as if they were parcels. And they got away with it. So the key question is, do you have a definition? And then the other bit of it is when you're talking about there's no customs declaration for those 4 types. Yes, there is. It's just that you're just phrasing it in a different way. There is some kind of data that has to be submitted about those movements. You might say, semantics is not an H8 or it's not, it's not a deck, but there's data, and that data, someone has to provide it, the shipper has to provide it, but the sender has to generate something for them. So it's worth knowing that. But going back to the question, do you have a definition of what a parcel is to access that scheme?
Yeah, so it's really difficult to say to define what a parcel is. What we have in the legal text within the Windsor framework is weight limits that define what can move under these schemes. So there's 2 weight limits that apply. For a multi-item parcel, anything up to 31.5 kilos can move through that scheme. A single item parcel, anything up to 100 kilos can move through that scheme. So it's not a car, but it's to... Yeah. And I think part of that is to allow... the 100 kilos sort of is up to like your standard sort of white goods. So if you're buying a fridge, a washing machine, that should be allowed to move without the requirements of any duty, etc. So that can move under those schemes. Multi-item parcels is generally kind of what parcel operators currently have in place, their own sort of weight limits. So they wouldn't generally take things above that as such just now.
Any more?
If there are any follow-up questions, we've got our team mailbox there, so please do reach out directly to us if there are any follow-ups.
Thank you very much. And that's a finish exactly on time. I have thoroughly enjoyed today. I hope you guys have. I mean, thank you to all our speakers. Thank you to all for attending, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one. Thank you.